What is up, everyone? Today we are going to break down the upcoming UFC Fight Night card from a DraftKings DFS perspective. This week's card being headlined by Marvin Vettori versus Roman Dolidze in the middleweight division. As of right now, we have a full 13 fight card. Let me just double check that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Yeah. Okay. So 13 fight card. We had a couple of very big weight misses. DR missed weight by 4.5 pounds, I believe. And then Chidi missed weight by, I think, a pound and a half. But from what I'm hearing, I think these fights are going to go ahead as scheduled. So obviously keep an eye out for that tomorrow, especially the hour before lock. Keep an eye out for any news. Potentially we could see a late scratch on one of these fights. But we're going to analyze this as if everything is good to go. And we will start off with the first fight of the night, Eunice Duben versus Carly Judice. Eunice Duben coming off of the Contender Series win where she got, I think, a first or second minute KO in what was one of the biggest upsets in Dana White Contender Series history. I think she was like plus 700 or something like that. Got the first round KO. And now she's here fighting Carly Judice, who is 0-2 in the UFC thus far. Losing on Contender Series in a very, very competitive split decision, and then her second fight losing a split decision in which many people thought she won. One thing that sticks out about Carly Judice is she has significant volume upside. Usually, from a pure striker, you're going to need, like, volume upside is one thing, like 80, 90 strikes, 100 strikes. But when you can put together, multiple performances of 170 significant strikes in 3 rounds, that's something that you have to respect. And although she doesn't have the best metrics from a $9,300 fighter, she does have that type of upside that I'm willing to play. I won't put her in my core plays. She's not one of my priority spend ups, but if I get to her, I get to her, and I won't be too upset about it. And I think she'll definitely be much lower owned than a lot of the other spend ups here. And she certainly has the upside to outscore a lot of these fighters. So I think she's like an interesting MME tournament pivot up in this 9K range. And then as far as Duben goes, just not winning that often. And I mean, can Lightning strike twice? Do you think she gets another first round KO in this division, right? What is it? Flyweight? Women's flyweight, I believe. It's very unlikely. I think that Judice is probably the side, if anything. But you can certainly throw Duben in there as a punt play. Next up, we will go to Josiane Nunes, Priscilla Cachoeira. This fight rates to be a kickboxing war on the feet for 15 minutes. Cachoeira 7.7K and Nunes 8,500. If you're going to give me two strikers that have a bit of volume upside and pretty lackluster finishing metrics, then give me the lower priced fighter Cachoeira in that spot. I think she's the preferred side here. When you really get into the metrics, it's not great for either side. I mean, plus 315 from a fight that's going to be pure striking, and sure has the volume upside, but I don't even think to the extent of like a Carly Judice has. If you get like 100 significant strike decision win, you're definitely going to want that out of Cachoeira opposed to Nunes having that type of performance. So she's going to be my preferred side. I think that overall this fight might be a bit overrated. It's just not going to finish that often. If it does, it'll probably pan out, but majority of the time, it's really not going to look too good from a DFS perspective. Next up, we have Daniel Barez versus Andre Lima. Andre Lima, where fantasy points go to die. He just is not active with his hands. He's very patient. I would say he has a high fight IQ. He's very calm in there. But from a DFS perspective, that's not really what we're looking for. You can see he got the DQ win where he scored 90 points. But besides that, he's scoring 50, 51, and 68 in decision wins. And that is way below what you need out of a 9K fighter. I think he's one of the weaker spend ups this week by a long shot. I don't have a lot of interest in him. Next up, Oh, and then Daniel Barez on the other side. I think Daniel Barez, you can mix him in as an underdog. And another thing I want to mention too is this week it is a very, very chalky card. You can see we have minus 500s, minus 400s all over the place. So I'm definitely implementing a bit of an underdog bias, as I like to call it, where when you're analyzing these underdogs from a DFS perspective, you can't be as greedy. Any given win could be good enough. You could see a 60-point win out of an underdog this week, and if that's one of the only underdogs to win or one of the only two underdogs to win, that's enough, and that's the optimal underdog. So you can't really be too greedy. Obviously, we're going to try to look for underdogs who have upside, but in general, on a card like this, you kind of have to respect every single one. Next up, we'll move on to Stephanie Luciano, Sam Hughes. Sam Hughes, run of the mill underdog. Give her some respect due to the underdog bias I just talked about. Luciano, probably not your favorite spend up. 8,800, pretty terrible ITD metrics, and I don't see her having much takedown upside, so probably a pass here for Luciano. Next up, Carlos Vera, Josias Musasa. This is a squash matchup. Musasa's, I believe, a 9-1 favorite. Really good ITD metrics, really good round one line as well. 9,400, reasonable price. We're not talking about this, 96, 9,700, 9,400. You'd like them to finish in round one, but it's not a requirement. I think he'll get him out of here early. He'll probably get a knockdown, maybe multiple knockdowns if Vera can survive. And Musasa is definitely a very strong spend up here. And as far as Vera goes, he's just not winning that often. If he does win, it's probably by fluke submission, which you guys know who've been listening to me. I just don't rate those outcomes very highly at all. I don't know how it's still happening. I know the pay-per-view last week, we saw 2 submissions from bottom guard, which is crazy to see that in MMA in 2025. Getting submitted off your back, it's a really bad look, and I just don't put much stock into those outcomes, especially with Vera, where that's, I mean, not to exaggerate too much, but that's probably his only path to victory is a fluky submission. So yeah, all my interest is on the Musasa side here. Next up, you versus Cunningham. I want to say Cunningham is one of these big underdogs that's somewhat live here on this card. I think he has some decent power in his hands. He has some decent striking. He'll be the longer fighter, the taller fighter in this matchup, and he could give you a tough test here. It just comes at the end of the day, though. Cunningham is fighting 2 weight classes below his normal weight class. He looked pretty rough on the scale. I mean, he made the weight, but he looked very rough. And Yu is just gonna play it conservatively, strike, 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 and then look for his takedowns. And I think he will be able to get them. So ultimately, he has takedown upside. He has the win odds value, and he has an okay ITD line. I mean, minus 120. It's not bad. I think he's an okay spend up. 9,500 is tough. I do like that he's a wrestler and not one of these pure strikers, because that means that he has a little bit more leeway to get there in the later rounds. He's not totally dependent on a round one finish. So Yu is another one of these guys. He'll look like a pretty strong spend up, and I think he's an okay play. Cunningham, I feel like he's maybe more live than the line indicates, but at the end of the day, I still do think Yu will get it done here. I guess Cunningham and all of these guys, all of these 6K fighters, they're all like plus 500 to win, and you probably don't want to play them unless you're getting really good leverage off of their opponent. So we'll have to see if Yu comes in as one of the most popular targets. Then I think Cunningham is certainly someone you can mix in. But if not, it's Cunningham. Unfortunately, is probably close to a fade here. Next up, Waldo Cortez Acosta, Ryan Spann. I actually like Ryan Spann here. Just a slight lean. I think he has the lighter man skill, right? He's coming up from light heavyweight into the heavyweight division. Cortez Acosta, he doesn't really do anything too special. He's a good kickboxer. Pretty mediocre power in his hands for the heavyweight division. and I don't see him mixing in takedowns in this matchup. I know he did versus Rebellis to Spain, and that was the perfect matchup to do that in. But I don't see him having that success in this matchup. And I just give Spann the finishing upside, um, either through submissions, guillotines, and through a knockout. So I do prefer Spann here in DFS, but I think both sides look okay at the end of the day. Moving on to Choi versus Vallejos. This is another squash matchup. Vallejos, one of the best plays on the slate. First off, he's only 9,100, and I think he has the best round one line, the best finishing line on the entire slate. He is a pure striker. So he's probably going to need to finish early. I mean, it's 9,100. You don't need him to finish in round one. You prefer it, but it's not a requirement. Yeah, not much to say here. I think Vallejos is one of the best plays on the slate. Scores 100 plus at a very high clip here, I imagine. And Choi, I guess you can play him because Vallejos will probably be popular, but just not a lot of interest here. He's not winning that often, and most of his scores are probably 2 to 5 points. So yeah, just a really gross play there, but you could potentially do it in MME. Next up, DR versus Brenson Ribeiro. I actually had this being one of the key fights on the slate until the big weight miss. I guess it is still a key fight, but the weight miss does annoy me. I mean, you're getting 4.5 extra pounds. That's going to be tough to overcome if you're Ribeiro. It didn't even look like DR tried to really cut the weight on the scale. He looked completely fine. I guess. Okay, so let's just look at this from the metrics here, and I'll tell you why I think this is a key fight. So you have DR, really, really strong ITD line, minus 150, plus 225 round one, and he's sub 9K. He's 8,900. Those are really strong metrics, and I think he's going to get jammed into a ton of lineups. He'll probably be, I imagine, around 40% owned this week. So you have that, and then you also have line value. I mean, this is a very unique card. You usually don't see an $8,900 fighter at a 4-1 favorite. So you have that going for him. But Ribeiro, the thing with him is his win condition is pretty much a finish, right? He has a really strong ITD line, plus 450, 7,300. I mean, it's not super strong, I guess, to be fair. But overall, I just see a lot of his wins being by knockout. And if you're going to get that type of upside at really low ownership, going up against what I imagine will be a very high owned DR, I think he could potentially be a very strong leverage play. The problem is he's not going to win the fight that often, but I think when he does, he'll provide some extremely solid upside and leverage. Next up, Damone Blackshear, Cody Gibson. Pretty weak fight. You got Blackshear, who has the submission upside, potentially the grappling upside. I think the grappling might be competitive, but Blackshear ultimately being the slightly better grappler here. And Blackshear, I kind of put him in the same category as Judice, where if I get to him, I won't be upset. I think he does have the path to potentially outscore some of these more chalky spend ups. But again, it's just not going to be as likely as a Kevin Vallejos or a Musasa. So Judice and Blackshear, kind of the same, similar story here, where they'll be very low owned, and I wouldn't be mad if I get to them, but they're definitely not the strongest play or the strongest plays in this price range. And then Cody Gibson, not winning often. You're not going to get leverage off of Blackshear, and I just don't know if he has a ton of upside, even if he does win. So an extremely weak play on the Cody Gibson side. Next up, Alexander Hernandez versus Kurt Holobaugh. Kurt Holobaugh has become the hipster underdog of the week. I like Hernandez here. I think thing with Hernandez, I don't really know if he has a ton of fantasy upside, which is what I'd want to see. 79 points, decision win. I guess if Hernandez wrestles, he might have upside. But outside of that, I think he probably wins a competitive decision here. And the one thing about Holobaugh, I mean, I know I don't put any stock into submissions off of your back, but he does do that. I've seen him do it. So if you're Hernandez, maybe you don't want to even give him that opportunity. I could see the logic behind that. So I don't know. I mean, this is just a Holobaugh is probably the DFS side, um, but I think overall I just don't have a lot of interest in this fight. Maybe I'll maybe I'll play Hernandez in some of my single entry stuff and hope he decides to wrestle. Um, but I just don't. The upside is very hard to see out of this fight. Next up, co-main event: Chidi versus Aleski dos Santos. This is a fight you want both sides of. I think Aleski dos Santos fights at a high pace. He has the takedown upside, and Chidi has early finishing upside. And outside of that, he probably starts to fade. Um, so I do think that one of these guys can definitely put up a big score here, and I have interest in both of them. And then last but not least, the main event, Vettori versus Dolidze. Main event, 5 rounds, right in the mid-range. It's going to be a very, very tough fade. Um, I may end up locking this in. I'll have to run some builds and see what I get. And depending on that, I might just lock this thing in. You got 5 rounds to work with or less. The finishing upside, I think, goes to Dolidze. Even though Marvin Vettori is historically very, very durable, he just took a lot of damage in his last fight. Like, we just saw Max Holloway get chinned. Durability doesn't last forever. So I could see a world where Roman finishes. I think he's the more likely to finish out of the two. And if they're on the feet, I think there'll be significant volume. 150 significant strikes, 200 significant strikes. We saw their first fight. It was 106 and 71. And that was in a 3-round fight. 5 rounds, you definitely will see some volume upside. I like both sides of this. The pricing is perfect. I'm going to go with Dolidze to win. I just think that Marvin Vettori, all the time off, coming off of the shoulder injury, I just favor Dolidze a little bit more in this matchup. And I think I'll say he gets it done by. I'll say Dolidze gets it done by a competitive decision. But in DFS, I definitely love both sides of this fight. That's going to do it. Thank you guys for watching. As always, if you have any questions, please leave a comment. Best of luck, everyone.